Today she who once was barren gives birth to Christ's forerunner. He himself is the fulfillment of all prophecy, prophet and forerunner of the coming of Christ. Through your glorious and holy birth, your mother was freed from barrenness, and your father from the loss of speech, and the incarnation of the Son of God is proclaimed to the world. If we look at the hymns for the feast of the birth of St. John, we see that he's never considered outside of his relationship to Jesus Christ, that his whole existence is to point to the one who comes after him, who ranks above him because he existed before him, as he says in the Gospel according to St. John. One thing that I think we can notice is when our hymns say that his birth frees his mother from barrenness and his father from the loss of speech, we can see that this birth has two effects on our less than perfect world, on fallen humanity. There is first his father's loss of speech, which comes about because of his father's lack of faith. This is something that we could categorize as sort of, without necessarily knowing what's going on in Zechariah's heart at that moment, externally, it's a moral failing. He is a priest. He is ministering in the Jerusalem temple, and yet he fails to believe the words of the angel announcing the birth of the forerunner. And the Old Testament is full of stories of such births, of couples who didn't have children, who were miraculously granted a child by the power of God. So if there's anybody who should be ready to accept this kind of news, it really should be a priest on active duty in the temple. He should be ready to receive this news, but he's not. And this leads to consequences, the obvious one being the loss of speech. And then through the birth of the forerunner, this gives his father opportunity to express faith, to acknowledge the angel's word, to name the child John as the angel commanded. So the birth of the forerunner undoes, in a way, his father's lack of faith. But then there's also his mother's barrenness, which is not a moral failing. St. Luke explicitly tells us that this couple is walking blamelessly in the commandments of the Lord. This is a consequence of just living in a fallen world where there is suffering. There is a less than perfect reality. Bad things happen to good people. And then our Lord looks on Elizabeth and grants her a child. And not just any child, but the one whom God himself testifies to as the greatest born of woman. So today is a real day of joy, because with the birth of John the Baptist, we have an image, a foreshadowing of what Christ is going to do. Through the birth of his holy cousin, we have a healing of the consequences of Zechariah's sin and a healing of wounded humanity. Ultimately, in this life, we expect the healing from sin. We have to cooperate with the grace of God in order to be healed from sin. Much of our weakness, much of the physical problems of human nature remain with us. But with the healing from sin comes also the hope of that final healing of human nature in the resurrection at the end of time. At the same time, John the Baptist doesn't cause any of this by his own power. He's a baby. He just got born. And so I think this is also a reminder that ultimately, it's not our job to save the world. It's not my job to save the world. Ultimately, the way we participate in the salvation of the world is by letting our lives point to Jesus Christ, as the forerunner did. It's not our job to save the world, it's our job to point to the one who does save the world. In the Anvon prayer for the Feast of an Apostle, we say that God has led us to the truth by the light of the grace of His only begotten Son shining in the Apostle. So, as we hear in the letter to the Romans for today's feast of the fact that the day is at hand, that we ought to put aside the works of darkness, perhaps this could be an opportunity to look in ourselves. Where are any works of darkness that I'm still attached to? St. Paul gave us a list of them. Maybe we could pick up our Bibles again and see if any of these are things that we're attached to, things that prevent the light of Christ shining in us. So we can pray for the self-awareness to be aware of where we may be still attached to works of darkness, and then we can go to confession, seek to turn our lives around, ultimately to seek to live our lives in the light of God's presence, in the light of the presence of the God who works both to heal the illness of our soul due to sin and the weakness of fallen human nature, the weakness that comes to us living in a less than perfect world, in order that in the resurrection we may be found whole and entire in the light of the face of God.